Well, good morning and welcome to this week's Kid Slot. We are back in the book of Ruth, picking up from where we left off last week. Everyone ready to go? Great. I just need to pop down in the lift and then just cross this river and then come up these stairs. So last week we left the story with Naomi and Ruth having just arrived back in Bethlehem. After Naomi and Ruth arrive in Bethlehem, they needed some food. "Let me go into the barley fields to pick up the leftover grain," Ruth said. In those days, the poor were allowed to go and pick up the grain that the harvester had left behind on the ground. "Go ahead, my daughter," Naomi replied. Now it just so happened that Ruth went into the fields that belonged to a man called Boaz. And it just so happened that Boaz was a relative of Naomi's dead husband Elimelech. Sometime later, Boaz arrived at the fields and greeted his harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. The harvesters replied, "The Lord bless you." Boaz noticed Ruth collecting grain with the poor. "Who is that woman?" he asked the man in charge of the harvesting. "She is the Moabite who returned with Naomi," he answered. "She asked permission to pick the grain and has been working really hard." Boaz went across to Ruth to speak to her. "Stay in these fields with the women who work for me," Boaz told her. "I have told the men to not lay a hand on you. And when you get thirsty, help yourself to the water jars the men have filled." So Ruth bowed down before Boaz. "Why are you treating a foreigner so kindly?" she asked. "I've been told how you have cared for Naomi," Boaz answered. "May God, under whose wings you have taken refuge, richly reward you. Even though I am lower than one of your servants, you have spoken so kindly to me and put me at my ease," Ruth responded. A little bit later on, Boaz invited Ruth to come and eat with the other harvesters. "Have some bread, dip it into the wine vinegar," he said, and he offered her roasted grain, and Ruth ate all she wanted. When Ruth got up to continue working, Boaz gave secret orders to his men. "Let her gather among the sheaves without telling her off. Even pull out some stalks from the bundles and drop them for her to gather." Ruth busily gathered grain until the evening. Ruth threshed the barley that she had gathered and took it home to Naomi. It was a large amount, about 13 kilograms worth. She also brought Naomi the food left over from the meal that she had with Boaz and the harvesters. "Where did you gather grain today?" Naomi asked. "Who is the man who has been kind to you?" "Boaz," Ruth replied. "The Lord bless him," said Naomi. "He is a close relative we know as our family redeemer. Under the law, he has an obligation to look after any relative who is in need." From that day on, Ruth continued gathering grain in the fields belonging to Boaz. She stayed close to the other women gathering grain, knowing that she would be safe. She worked hard in the barley harvest and then in the wheat harvest that followed, making sure that Naomi had enough food to eat. I love the book of Ruth, and this story is just brilliant. And in chapter 2, we see more of Ruth's courage as she goes into the fields on her own to pick the bits of corn that are left over on the floor. It was actually a very dangerous thing to do, especially for someone who was a foreigner. But such is her love for Naomi, she wants to go and to help her and to provide for her. But what I love most of all about this chapter is that we can see God's kindness and God's control over it all. Did you notice there was one phrase that I repeated a couple of times as we went through the story? It just so happened. So it just so happened that Ruth went to the field that belonged to Boaz. And it just so happened that Boaz was a man who loved God, who was kind, but was also a family redeemer. That means that under the Old Testament law, a family redeemer has an obligation to look after and be kind to family relatives. So it just so happened that Ruth wandered into his field. Of all the fields she could have wandered into, it was that one. Actually, it was no coincidence. God was in total control of it all, looking after Naomi and Ruth and providing for them through Boaz and through Boaz's kindness. So it's such a great reminder to us, isn't it? This is what our God is like. He is in control. Even though sometimes we struggle to understand what he might be doing or what's going on, even in the midst of those difficult times that we go through, if we look hard enough, we'll be able to see his kindness to us, even in the midst of that. We're going to finish up the story next week. Looking forward to it already.